It happened in the winter of 2019 when I was working the night shift at a small grocery store just outside of Indianapolis. The store wasn't big, just a quiet family-run place that closed at midnight. Most of the time, it was just me and one other employee running the register while we waited for the last customers to trickle out. That night, it was colder than usual. The kind of night where frost covered the windows and the parking lot was eerily empty. The manager had left early, which meant it was just me and a guy named Jake closing up. At around 11:30 p.m., the place was dead silent, except for the occasional hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the overhead lights. I was in the back, restocking shelves in aisle 6, one of those narrow aisles where the shelves are tall enough that you can't see over them. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the next aisle over. I figured it was just a last-minute customer, maybe someone who had slipped in just before closing. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed something strange. The footsteps weren't moving down the aisle, they were just pacing back and forth. I hesitated, the can of soup in my hand hovering mid-air. Something about the sound made my skin crawl. It wasn't the normal, aimless shuffle of a late-night shopper. It was too steady, too controlled. I leaned forward, peering through the gap in the shelves. A man was standing there. He was tall, wearing a long coat that looked too thin for the freezing weather. His back was to me, his hands at his sides. He wasn't looking at the shelves. He wasn't holding anything. He was just standing there. Something about the way he stood was wrong. His posture was stiff, like he was straining to keep perfectly still. His head was tilted slightly downward, but I couldn't see his face. A wave of unease rolled over me. I stepped back, quietly placing the can on the shelf, and decided to walk around to the next aisle to get a better look. As soon as I turned the corner, he was gone. The aisle was empty. I scanned the store, my heart pounding a little harder than before. There were no sounds, no movement, nothing. The automatic doors at the front hadn't opened, and I hadn't heard anyone walk past me, but the man was nowhere. I headed toward the front of the store, trying to shake the weird feeling creeping up my spine. Jake was behind the register, scrolling through his phone like nothing was wrong. I asked him if he had seen anyone come in. He frowned and shook his head, said the last customer had left 15 minutes ago. I felt a chill roll down my back. I went to check the security cameras. The screen flickered as I rewound the footage, scanning the aisles. When I reached the moment I had seen him, my stomach dropped. The man wasn't there. I could see myself standing in aisle 6, peering through the shelves. But the space where he had been standing was empty. I replayed it again and again. Every time the result was the same. The footage showed nothing. I felt my hands go cold. I knew what I had seen. I wasn't tired. I wasn't imagining things. That man had been real. Jake must have noticed how pale I looked because he asked me if I was okay. I hesitated, then just told him the cameras were acting up. No way he would believe me, and honestly, I didn't want to explain something I couldn't understand myself. We finished closing up and locked the doors. I tried to put it out of my mind as I stepped into the parking lot, the cold air biting at my skin. But as I turned to look back at the store, something made my stomach drop. Through the glass doors, past the empty aisles, I saw him, standing at the end of aisle 6, watching, and this time, he was smiling. It happened in the summer of 2021 when I was working at a 24-hour grocery store in a small town in Montana. I'd taken the job to make some extra cash while I was in school, and for the most part it was uneventful. Late-night shifts were usually quiet, with only a few exhausted truckers or night owls wandering the aisles. But that night, something happened that I still can't explain. It was around 2 a.m., and I was in the back storage area, restocking the walk-in freezer. The store was nearly empty, just me and one other guy working the registers up front. The air inside the freezer was thick with cold, my breath fogging up in front of me as I moved boxes around. The only sound was the steady hum of the cooling units. Then I heard it, a soft knocking. I froze. The sound was faint, coming from the other side of the thick metal freezer door. At first I thought it was my coworker messing with me. I called out, asking what he wanted. No answer. Just another knock. I felt a cold wave of unease creep up my spine. I stepped toward the door, reaching for the handle, but then something stopped me. The knocking came again, but this time it was from inside the freezer. My breath caught in my throat. I whipped around, my eyes scanning the shelves, stacked with frozen meat and dairy. There was no one else in there, just rows of neatly stacked boxes, and the frosty air swirling around me. I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe something shifting on the shelves, the cold air making the metal pop. But deep down I knew better. Then the lights flickered. For half a second the freezer plunged into darkness. And in that moment I swear I saw something move between the shelves. A shape, a shadow, something tall and thin, shifting just out of sight. The lights came back on and the freezer was empty again. The unease turned into full-blown fear. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle, desperate to get out. But when I pulled, it didn't budge. It was stuck. Panic surged through me. The door shouldn't lock from the inside. That was store policy. No way to get trapped in here. But no matter how hard I yanked, the heavy metal door wouldn't move. Then I felt it, a breath, right against the back of my neck. The air was ice cold, colder than the freezer itself. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The freezer was still empty, but the frost on the glass doors had started to change. Words were appearing, forming in the fog. "Let me out!" I stumbled back, my breath coming in sharp gasps. My mind raced. Someone had to be messing with me, but I was alone. There was no one else working in the back. Then I noticed something worse. The frost wasn't just forming words. A handprint pressed against the inside of the glass, and it was on the other side. I slammed against the freezer door, pounding on it, yelling for my co-worker. The lights flickered again, and this time I heard a sound that still haunts me. A laugh, not loud, not human, a breathy, distorted chuckle that seemed to come from everywhere. Then, just as suddenly as it had stuck, the freezer door swung open. I stumbled out, nearly falling to the floor. My co-worker was standing there, wide-eyed, asking what was wrong. I tried to speak, tried to explain, but my throat felt raw, my mind still reeling from what I had just seen. I turned back toward the freezer, half expecting to see something staring back at me, but the frost had already melted. The handprint was gone. I never told my manager, never told anyone, really, but I quit that job 2 weeks later. And sometimes when I walk past the frozen food section in any store, I swear I can hear it again, a faint knocking from the other side of the glass. It happened in the fall of 2022 when I was working at a grocery store in rural Texas. It wasn't a big chain, just a small-town market that had been around for decades, the kind of place where regular customers had been shopping there since they were kids. The store closed at 11 p.m. and I usually worked the late shift, stocking shelves and cleaning up after hours. That night it was just me and one other guy, Chris, who was finishing up in the back. The store had been quiet for the last hour and I was sweeping near the dairy aisle when I saw him, a man standing perfectly still at the end of the aisle. He wasn't looking at anything, just standing there, facing the shelves, his back to me. I hadn't heard him come in. The front doors made a loud beep whenever someone entered, and I was sure there had been no customers for the past hour. But there he was. I called out, asking if he needed help, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless. Something about the way he was standing made me uncomfortable. His posture was too stiff, too unnatural. Like he said he wasn't used to being in his own body. I took a step closer, repeating myself, but he still didn't react. He was wearing old, tattered clothes, like something from decades ago, and his hands were hanging limply at his sides. His skin looked pale, almost grey under the harsh fluorescent lights. Then he moved, not like a normal person. His head snapped to the side in one quick motion, turning toward me, but his body didn't move, just his head. His eyes weren't right, too wide, too dark, like they didn't belong to him. His mouth slowly curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A deep sense of dread crawled over me. Something about him felt wrong on every level. I took a step back, and as soon as I did, the man turned completely and started walking toward me. Not running, not rushing, just a slow, deliberate walk, like he had all the time in the world. I felt a surge of panic. I turned and hurried toward the front, trying to find Chris, but the moment I stepped into the next aisle, I nearly ran into him. I told him there was someone in the store, someone who wasn't right. He looked at me, confused, then glanced past me toward the aisle where the man had been. It was empty. I insisted I had seen him, that he had been right there. Chris shrugged it off, said maybe I'd imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. We finished closing up, and I tried to shake the uneasy feeling, telling myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But as I locked the front doors and turned off the lights, I glanced back at the store one last time. The man was standing inside, right in the middle of the darkened aisles. Watching me? I felt my entire body go cold. The doors were locked. There was no way anyone could still be in there. I turned to tell Chris, but when I looked back, he was gone. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying what I had seen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it had been a shadow, a trick of the lights. But the next night I found out I wasn't the only one who had seen him. One of the older employees, a woman named Linda, overheard me talking about what happened. She pulled me aside and asked me to describe the man. When I told her, her face went pale. She told me there was a story about this store. Years ago, back when the store had first opened, a man had gone missing while working the night shift. He had been last seen in the dairy aisle. No signs of a break-in, no clues, nothing. One moment he was there, and the next he wasn't. They had searched the whole town, but he was never found. Eventually, people just stopped asking. Linda told me that over the years, other employees had seen him too. Always late at night, always standing perfectly still in the aisles, always with that same eerie smile. She said that some people believed he never really left. I quit 2 weeks later, but sometimes, when I drive past that store late at night, I swear I can see something through the glass. A man standing perfectly still, smiling. Grocery stores seem ordinary. Bright lights, stocked shelves, and the hum of refrigerators, but sometimes they aren't as empty as they seem. A man who was never there, a presence that watches, a door that refuses to stay closed. If these stories made you think twice about your next late-night grocery run, like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon because some customers never leave. Stay safe and shop carefully.